My name is Isabella Whitmore. I'm 37, and I never thought silence could cut so deep. Until my father raised his glass at our family reunion and toasted every single person at the table, except me. No accident, no oversight, just silence. And when I finally stood up to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I just said one sentence. And that was enough to shatter everything he thought he knew about me. This isn't just a story about family. It's about finding peace when the apology never comes. Stay with me. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you feel this already, go ahead and hit subscribe. You're not alone in this. Let's go back. I stood there, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the clinking of champagne flutes. My cousins laughed. My brother winked at Dad like they shared some inside joke, and Mom nodded proudly from across the room. But me? I sat frozen in my chair, my hands resting in my lap like a schoolgirl who'd just been passed over in roll call. I had smiled for hours, helped organize the whole evening, flew in from Denver with a gift for everyone, even wore the emerald dress Dad once said reminded him of Grandma's eyes. And yet, I was invisible. The toast wasn't long. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Just long enough to praise my brother James for his new company, Aunt Lorraine for her courage through chemo, even the neighbor's daughter who helped coordinate the flowers. Then he lowered his glass, sipped, and the moment was gone. Except it wasn't. Not for me. I felt the heat in my face rise slowly, like water in a kettle. Not loud, not boiling, but steady and scalding. He didn't forget me. He looked directly at me twice. Once, while thanking Mom. The other, when he mentioned James. His eyes passed over mine and kept moving, like I didn't belong. That was the moment. The moment I stood. I didn't plan to. My knees moved on their own, like a child rising in protest. My breath caught in my chest, tight and unsure. I could feel 17 pairs of eyes swing toward me. My fingers trembled. I reached for my glass, and the silence wrapped around me like a scarf made of smoke. Not heavy, just suffocating. I was about to speak, and then something inside me collapsed. But before I tell you what I said, or what happened next, I need you to understand what led me to that moment. Because this story didn't start at the reunion. It started a long time ago. At a dinner table in 1998, in a house that always had enough food but never enough love. Back then, I was the quiet one, the helper, the planner. The girl who stayed up late making flashcards for James before his tests, even though I had my own exams the next day. The one who ironed Dad's shirts before Sunday church while James slept in and still got praised for looking sharp. My father, Charles Whitmore, was a man of pride and presence, ex-military. Everything in our house ran on rules: shoes off by the door, elbows off the table, compliments when earned, tears only in private. He believed in strength, discipline, and the kind of love that looked more like performance than presence. James Dodd, of course, fit that mold like a tailored suit. Star athlete, quick with a joke, a natural leader. He could stumble through a sentence and still get a standing ovation. Me? I was careful, thoughtful, a girl who loved books more than birthday parties, who got nervous speaking in crowds, who once wrote a 12-page apology letter to Mom after breaking her vase. I didn't shine, I simmered. And Dad? Dad didn't have time for simmering. The first time I remember feeling it, the absence, was my 11th birthday. James had a soccer match that day, and I was told we'd celebrate later. The game ran long. Everyone cheered. We got ice cream on the way home. But nobody remembered the candles. That night, I cried into my pillow, whispering happy birthday to myself in the dark. It was always like that. James getting a new bike for Christmas while I unwrapped socks and a polite, "Thank you for being so responsible." James crashing Mom's car and Dad shrugging it off as, "Boys will be boys." Me getting a B+ in calculus and hearing, "You could have done better if you weren't so distracted all the time." I didn't resent James. Not exactly. He was charming. He didn't ask for the spotlight. He just lived in it. What hurt wasn't that he had it. What hurt was how willingly my father handed it to him, every single time, without even glancing to see if I was standing in the dark. I left for college on a Tuesday. Dad shook my hand instead of hugging me. He told me to make the family proud. Then turned to James and said, "Watch the game tonight. Broncos are playing." As if I hadn't just packed my whole life into a trunk and loaded it into a borrowed sedan. Still, I tried. I sent postcards, called every Sunday. Showed up for holidays with pie and presents and soft smiles. I thought, maybe if I just stay kind, stay consistent, he'll see me. But some people don't see reflections. They only see projections. And I was never what Dad wanted to see. Years passed. I built a quiet, beautiful life in Denver. Became a therapist. Learned to listen. I started running on Sundays. Cooking for friends. Finding joy in small, sacred things. I stopped trying to prove myself. Stopped chasing applause. Mostly. Until the reunion, James had just sold his company. The whole event had the air of a coronation. Dad booked a private garden room at the best Italian place in Boulder. String lights, soft jazz, name cards. He even hired a photographer. I almost didn't go. Something in me hesitated when I opened the invitation. But I convinced myself, again, that this time might be different. That maybe Dad would see me not as the quiet girl with the flashcards, but as the woman I'd become. I wore that green dress for a reason. Grandma used to say it made me look like spring. And for a few hours, it worked. Mom hugged me extra long. My cousins gushed over my career. Even James seemed genuine when he said, "You look happy, Izzy." Then came the toast. Everyone clinked glasses. Dad stood tall, chin up, voice booming with pride. It was like watching a director give final bows. And when he skipped my name, when he looked right past me, something inside me fractured. So I stood. Now, here's what no one tells you about silence. It remembers. It doesn't fade. It stores itself in your spine, your stomach, your chest. It waits for years until the moment comes when you can no longer carry it quietly. That moment had come for me. I looked across the table. My mother's smile faltered. James lowered his glass slightly. Dad looked up, confused, annoyed even. Like I was interrupting something sacred. My voice was small, barely more than breath. "Before we move on," I said, "I just want to say one thing." The room went still. Before that reunion, before the silence wrapped itself around my throat like velvet rope, my life was soft, quiet, structured, filled with warmth I created for myself. I lived in a 2-bedroom brownstone in Capitol Hill, Denver. Plants lined my windows. My dog, Miles, an old golden retriever with a limp and a heart of gold, followed me everywhere like a loyal, sleepy shadow. I ran a small therapy practice out of the back room where soft light and quiet jazz greeted every client. My schedule was full, but never overflowing. I left space for long walks, handwritten letters, and slow Sunday breakfasts. I had learned, over the years, how to build a life that didn't ache. In many ways, it looked peaceful. To some, maybe even enviable. I drank good coffee. I read old poetry. I knew how to make people feel heard, and I knew how to disappear into silence when I needed to. But beneath that stillness lived something else. A low hum I carried in my chest, the sound of almost loved, almost seen, almost worthy. I'd grown used to that feeling. The hum of being second. Second to James. Second to Dad's expectations. Second to someone else's story. Still, I held one belief like a golden thread in my heart, that if I kept choosing love, kept showing up, Eventually, people would see me for who I truly was. That goodness earned recognition. That effort equaled value. It was naive, maybe, but it gave me something to hold. I think I got that from Mom. Her name's Evelyn, and she's the kind of woman who makes apologies for things she didn't do just to keep the peace. She's gentle, soft-spoken, always smoothing wrinkles. In tablecloths, in tempers, in truth. I loved her deeply, but she lived her life orbiting around my father, like a moon afraid of breaking its path. Dad, as I said, was military through and through. Straight spine, tight smile. He carried silence like a sword. He didn't have to raise his voice to win. One look, one sharp exhale, and the room adjusted. People respected him, admired him, even loved him. In that complicated way, people love men who command space without needing permission. But love wasn't the word I'd use. Not really. Reverence? Maybe. Caution? Sometimes fear? Growing up, I thought that was normal. That love should feel earned. James never had to earn anything. He walked into a room and it bent toward him like grass to sunlight. He was loud, confident, easy to like. The kind of kid who never studied but still passed. Who cracked a joke during Dad's lectures and somehow got away with it. Even when he messed up, which he did, often, the consequences always softened. He's just figuring it out, Dad would say. Boys need room to stumble. But I was never given that room. Once, in high school, I got a C on a pop quiz. Just one. Dad found it in the trash, circled in red ink. That night, he didn't yell. He just stared at me, then said, "I thought you were better than that." The words carved themselves into my ribs. I started to equate love with performance. If I didn't do enough, I didn't matter. So I became the overachiever, the pleaser, the fixer, the girl who never asked for more because she feared hearing she didn't deserve it. In my 20s, I dated a man named Daniel. He was kind at first, attentive, thoughtful, always asking about my day. But over time, he began to mirror Dad. He'd tease me for overthinking everything, talk over me at dinner parties, make small decisions without telling me. I stayed for 3 years. 3 years thinking maybe if I loved him more softly, he'd love me more loudly. He never did. When I finally left, I didn't cry. I just packed, wrote a short note, and drove away with Miles in the passenger seat. I remember looking in the rearview mirror and whispering to myself, "You don't have to prove anything anymore." But somewhere deep inside, I didn't believe it. Not yet. I threw myself into work, started seeing clients full-time. Women mostly. Women who looked like they had it all together on the outside but carried grief under their skin like invisible bruises. I understood them. I saw the way they shrunk to fit into roles written by someone else. I helped them remember who they were before the shrinking. It was ironic, really. Helping others heal while still carrying my own quiet wound. And then there was the family. We weren't estranged, just distant. Texts on holidays, occasional calls. The last time I saw James before the reunion was 2 years ago at Thanksgiving. He'd just started dating a woman named Clara. She was tall, brilliant, ran her own wellness startup. Dad adored her. He pulled her chair out, laughed at her stories, even poured her wine with the kind of attention I'd never seen him give Mom. At one point, I complimented her earrings. She smiled and said, "Thanks. James got them for me. He says I'm the only woman he knows who deserves emeralds." My stomach flipped. I wore emeralds all the time. Dad used to say they looked like Grandma's eyes. That was our thing. Later that night, I asked Dad if he remembered that. He blinked, said, "I don't recall," and moved on to carving the turkey. It was a small moment, but it stuck. The invitation to the reunion came 3 months before the event. Gold-embossed, formal. James's company had just been acquired, and Dad wanted to celebrate. "Family only," the card said. Mom called a week later, asking if I'd come. It would mean a lot to your father, she said. I almost declined. Work was busy. Miles was getting older. The flights were expensive. But a part of me, the old part, the aching part, whispered, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the moment he sees you. I bought the green dress 2 weeks later. In the lead up to the reunion, I caught myself daydreaming. Silly things. Dad introducing me to people with pride, saying something kind in front of the family, maybe even apologizing, or at least acknowledging the years I'd spent quietly trying. I imagined him raising his glass and saying, "My daughter Isabella. She's the strongest person I know." Those dreams were fragile. I knew better than to hold them too tightly. But I wanted to believe, just once. 2 days before the event, I got a call from James. "Hey, Izzy," he said, casually. "Just making sure you'll be there on time. You're still okay to help with the seating chart, right?" I paused. I hadn't agreed to that, but I said yes. The day of the reunion, I arrived early, helped Mom with the table settings, carried boxes, smiled through small talk. Dad barely looked up when I entered. "You made it," he said flatly, then turned back to his phone. But even then, I held on. I told myself he was just busy, focused, maybe saving his warmth for the big moment. I saw the photographer arrive, saw James hand out gifts to the cousins. I waited. And then, he stood, raised his glass, spoke like a king giving thanks to his court. He named everyone but me. "Before we move on," I said, voice trembling like the glass I held, "I just want to say one thing." Every fork froze midair. The air itself went still. You could hear the soft breath of someone across the room exhaling. Slow, uneasy, like the sound before a storm. Dad blinked, confused. His smile faltered. Mom's eyes widened in a way that begged me, please, to just sit down. James tilted his head slightly, like I'd just misread a script we were all supposed to follow. I looked at my father, and in that single glance, I saw everything I had ever been, and everything I had never become in his eyes. But I couldn't speak. Not the words I meant, not the truth buried inside me. So instead, I smiled. A tiny, tight smile. Lifted my glass halfway and said, "Thank you, everyone, for being here." Then I sat down. And that was worse than if I'd screamed. Because in that moment, in that unfinished, suffocated gesture, I abandoned myself. Again, the party carried on. People laughed. The music returned. Toasts gave way to tiramisu and photos, but I was gone, still sitting, still smiling, but completely vanished inside myself. It was as if I'd fallen through a crack in the floor, and no one noticed. I stayed until the end. Kissed cheeks, hugged Mom, waved at James, even thanked Dad for the beautiful evening. He nodded, said, "You looked nice tonight," and turned away. That night, I drove back to the Airbnb and locked the door behind me. I slipped out of my green dress like it was made of glass shards, curled up on the edge of the bed with Miles resting his chin on my knee. And I broke. Not in loud sobs. Not at first. It started with silence. Deep, aching silence. My hands pressed to my mouth as if holding something back. Grief or rage or memory. I couldn't tell. Then I began to cry, and cry, and cry. Tears I hadn't known were waiting. Tears I thought I'd long outgrown. Tears from birthdays missed and awards ignored. From lonely piano recitals and one-sided conversations. From every time I reached out and came back empty. It wasn't just about the toast. It was everything the toast revealed. That I was still invisible. Still unclaimed. Still not enough. I tried to sleep, but my body trembled like it was trying to shake something loose. My thoughts spiraled. What is wrong with me? Why doesn't he love me the way he loves James? What am I still doing here, trying to earn something that was never mine? Shame crept in like a fog. Thick, heavy. I felt childish, embarrassed. 37 years old and still longing for Daddy's approval like a little girl at a recital. But with the shame came clarity. Because for the first time, I saw the pattern. I saw how every relationship I'd built, every man I'd fallen for, every job I'd overperformed at, every person I'd bent over backwards to please, was just a different version of him. A new table where I was still begging to be seen. And the worst part, I had taught people how to treat me by staying quiet. I spiraled. The next morning, I didn't get out of bed. I canceled 2 sessions with clients, something I'd never done before. I couldn't bear the thought of offering others stability when I had none. I stared at the ceiling, the cracks in the drywall like fault lines in my mind. I replayed it, over and over. The moment he looked at me and said nothing. The guilt crept in next. That sick, familiar voice whispering, "You're overreacting." He didn't mean it. "You're too sensitive." It was just a toast. But then came the rage. It was quiet at first, a pulse in my temples, a tightening in my jaw. But it grew. Not fire, but pressure. The kind of pressure that builds in the deep before something erupts. I began pacing, whispering to myself. He knew what he was doing. He looked right at me. He made a choice. I went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and barely recognized myself. My face was blotchy, my eyes swollen. But beneath that, beneath the grief, was something I hadn't seen before. Defiance. Not loud, not yet, but alive. I picked up my phone, typed out a message to James. "Hey, quick question. Did Dad ask you to help with the toast?" I expected a delay. I expected denial. But within seconds, 3 dots appeared. Then the truth hit like a slap across the chest. "Yeah, he did. He wanted it to be a family-wide celebration. Said he was writing it to make a point." A point? I stared at the words, my hands trembling. "What point?" I typed back. James replied, "I think he was upset you didn't come last Christmas. Thought you've been distant. Said something about you choosing your own life over family." That was it. He'd erased me from the toast, from the moment, on purpose. As punishment. I felt the room spin. I sat down on the bathroom floor, tile cold against my spine. All this time, I thought he just forgot me, that maybe I'd slipped his mind. But no, he remembered me perfectly. He remembered me enough to exclude me, deliberately, publicly, and something in me snapped. Because now, it wasn't just about feeling forgotten. It was about being punished for choosing peace, for choosing my life, for choosing myself. I spiraled again. Not with tears this time, with questions. I ransacked my memory for signs. Had he always done this? Had he always withheld affection when I didn't perform, didn't comply, didn't orbit his world? Yes. Yes, he had. I remembered when I turned down the corporate job he wanted me to take after grad school. The silence that followed for months. I remembered when I said I didn't want kids. The disapproving look, the quiet condescension. I remembered the way he always praised James's loyalty to family, as if my independence was a betrayal. I hadn't noticed it fully before. Or maybe I had, and just didn't want to see it. But now, the truth was laid bare. My father didn't want a daughter. He wanted a mirror. Someone to reflect his values, his choices, his legacy. And I had refused. So he erased me. I sat in that silence for hours, Miles curled at my side, the Denver skyline glowing faintly through the window, and I felt myself collapse. Not all at once, not like a building, but like a glacier, long held, now cracking from within. I didn't eat that day, didn't shower, Didn't respond to the dozen texts from family saying how wonderful it was to see everyone. That night, I took out an old notebook, one I hadn't touched in years, the one where I used to write letters I never sent. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "Dear Dad, you didn't forget me. You erased me." The days after the reunion blurred like watercolor in the rain. I flew back to Denver in silence. No music in my earbuds. No books cracked open on the flight. Just me and the ache and the seatbelt pressing into my ribs like a reminder that I hadn't spoken up. Not really. That I let him erase me and thanked him for the evening anyway. When I stepped into my apartment, it felt unfamiliar. Like a place someone else had curated for a version of me that didn't exist anymore. The plants I once tended with such care were drooping. The windows were dusty. Miles wagged his tail slowly, sensing the shift in the air. I unpacked nothing. I moved from bed to couch to kitchen in loops, barely eating. I canceled sessions, told clients I had the flu. I deleted messages from my mom without reading them. I ignored James's texts entirely. My phone became a museum of unsent replies. For the first time in years, I didn't know what to do with myself. The clarity I'd felt in the bathroom, that raw surge of defiance, it had vanished. What replaced it was numbness, and then, slowly, recklessness. On the fourth night back, I poured a second glass of wine. Then a third. I hadn't drunk like that in years. I turned on the TV, muted it, and stared at the flickering images like they held the meaning I'd lost. The next morning, I woke with a headache, mascara smeared across the pillow, and an old ache in my stomach I hadn't felt since my 20s. The ache of doing things that make you feel worse, not better. Still, I didn't stop. I went out with an old acquaintance, Olivia, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. She was fun, loud, messy, a whirlwind. We went to bars, danced past midnight, flirted with men who didn't ask for last names. For a few nights, I felt free. Unattached, unbothered. But it was hollow. One night, after too many drinks, I told a man I barely knew about the toast. I laughed as I said it, like it was funny, like I was over it. He blinked, confused, and said, "That's kinda messed up." Then changed the subject. The next morning, I felt humiliated. I looked in the mirror and didn't see a woman healing. I saw a woman unraveling. I tried to course correct, signed up for a yoga class, booked a therapy session with a colleague I trusted named Margot. She was older, wise in a way that didn't feel preachy, just grounded. Her office smelled like sandalwood and old books. When I sat down, I didn't cry. I just said, "I think I'm finally done." She tilted her head gently. "With what?" I swallowed. Chasing something I'll never get, trying to be the kind of daughter he wants. She nodded slowly, as if waiting for me to go deeper. "But," I added, "I still feel like I'm the one who failed, like I should have spoken up, like I should have stood taller." She paused, then said something I'll never forget. "There's a difference between not fighting back and choosing not to keep bleeding." I blinked. That sentence cracked something in me. She didn't offer solutions. She asked questions. Real ones. The kind that peeled away my practiced answers. Over the next few weeks, I started returning to myself, slowly. I walked miles every morning, cooked again, played piano at night, even if just for 10 minutes. It was like rebuilding a house from rubble. No dramatic declarations, just quiet repairs. But healing isn't linear. About 6 weeks after the reunion, I got a call from my mom. I almost didn't answer. But something in me, curiosity, maybe hope, picked it up. "Your father's turning 65 next month," she said. "We're planning a little dinner, just the immediate family." I went cold. She continued, hesitantly, "It would mean a lot to him if you came." I was quiet. Then she added, softly, "He's been distant." even with James. That caught me off guard. Why? I asked. She hesitated. I think he expected you to say something that night. I think maybe he wanted a fight. I didn't know how to respond. The invitation stirred something in me. Maybe it was the old ache, the one that wanted a resolution, a clean ending. Maybe it was ego. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the part of me that still believed in turning back one last time to see if the door might open. So I went. I dressed simply. No emerald dress. No performance. Just me. Black turtleneck. Minimal makeup. Clear eyes. When I arrived, the table was already full. James was there. Clara, too. Mom smiled, but there was tension in her eyes. Dad stood when he saw me. Stiff, unreadable. We sat, ate, made small talk. And then, toward the end of the night, he raised his glass. I'd like to say something, he said. My stomach tightened. He cleared his throat. I know I haven't always been expressive, or fair, or present. That was all. No apology, just that. I waited for more, but it never came. Everyone else smiled, nodded. James clinked his glass. But I sat there, frozen. Something in me hoped, just for a second, that this was the moment, the turning point, the recognition. But it wasn't. It was another performance. A vague gesture dressed as vulnerability. Later, when I said goodbye, Dad patted my shoulder. Glad you came, he said. I nodded, got in my car, drove home in silence, and cried the entire way. Because that was the night I finally accepted the truth. He would never become the man I needed him to be. And I had to stop waiting. The next morning, I made the hardest decision of my life. I wrote a letter, not to him, to myself. It said, "You are not unfinished because he never completed you. You are not unworthy because he never saw your worth. And you are not broken because he never picked up the pieces." Then I blocked his number. It wasn't spite. It wasn't anger. It was liberation. I didn't announce it to anyone. I didn't make a scene. But I began the process of letting go. Truly letting go. Not out of rage, but out of mercy. For myself. That weekend, I hosted a dinner. Just 6 people. Friends who had become family. I cooked, laughed, played piano. Someone toasted me, unprompted, and called me the glue in every room. I smiled. Not because I needed it, but because I believed it. Margot once told me, healing requires a necessary funeral. You have to bury the fantasy before the truth can bloom. I was finally burying it. Grief has a strange way of softening into wisdom, if you let it. After I let go of my father, not with fire, but with finality, something in me shifted. Not overnight, but steadily. Like the first breath after a long swim underwater. I started reclaiming my mornings. I used to scroll my phone before even brushing my teeth. But now, I woke early, brewed tea, and sat by the window in silence with Miles curled at my feet. Denver mornings were crisp in spring, and I began to savor them. The sun casting honey on the hardwood floors, the smell of eucalyptus from the candle I lit each dawn. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to become anything. I wasn't performing. I wasn't adjusting myself to fit someone else's mold. I was just being. I restructured my practice. Before, I'd taken on too many clients, bent over backward to be available at all hours, afraid that saying no made me selfish. Now, I streamlined. I cut my caseload in half. I raised my rates. I created a waiting list. The moment I stopped begging to be needed, I realized I had value. With the extra time, I built something new. A virtual workshop for women raised by emotionally distant parents. I called it The Unseen Daughters. I expected 10 people to sign up. 87 showed up for the first session. They cried, they laughed, They saw themselves in each other, and I saw myself in them. Each time I spoke, I felt more whole, like all the wounds had turned into windows, like my pain had finally earned its purpose. Margot helped me refine it. She became more than a therapist. She became a mentor. Sometimes, after sessions, we'd sit on the steps outside her office and drink chamomile tea. One afternoon, she said something that stuck with me. "Your father built a fortress around himself. You tried for years to knock on the door. But maybe the power isn't in breaking in. Maybe it's in building something beautiful without him." So that's what I did. I redecorated my apartment. New paint, warmer colors, fewer shadows. I gave away the emerald dress, not out of spite, but release. It had served its purpose. I was done dressing for someone else's memory. I picked up painting again, something I hadn't touched since college. Abstract watercolors, mostly. Swirls of feeling with no need for perfection. My walls began to fill with my own colors. I wasn't just creating art, I was claiming space. And then there was Daniel. Yes, that Daniel. He sent me a message out of the blue, 4 months after the reunion. Said he was in town. Said he'd thought about me a lot. I almost didn't respond, but curiosity got the better of me. We met for coffee. He looked the same. Charming smile, slightly older eyes. We talked. I listened. He shared stories, mostly about himself, as usual. But what struck me wasn't his words. It was how I felt while he said them. I felt nothing. No longing. No ache. No wish to be chosen. I realized in that moment how far I'd come. That the part of me who once begged for crumbs had learned to bake her own bread. When we hugged goodbye, he said, "You've changed. You're quieter, but stronger." I smiled and said, "No, Daniel. I'm just finally me." That night, I lit a candle, opened my notebook, and wrote, "You are no longer a mirror. You are light." One morning in early June, I walked miles to the park and sat on our usual bench. The city was beginning to bloom again. Goldenrod, daisies, that faint smell of rain in the soil. I watched couples walk by, children playing, someone strumming a guitar under a tree. And I felt peace. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to see me. I wasn't building my worth on someone else's silence. I had stopped chasing apologies. I had learned to bless the wound without clinging to the knife. That's when I met Theo. It wasn't dramatic. No rom-com moment. Just two people reaching for the same book at a local used bookstore. Rilke, of all things. We both laughed, then spent 15 minutes pretending not to hover near each other in the poetry section. He asked if I'd read Letters to a Young Poet. I said I had. He asked what I thought. I told him it saved my life once. 2 weeks later, we were sitting on my floor, surrounded by paintbrushes and half-eaten takeout, talking about grief, art, and how we both hated small talk. Theo was quiet, grounded. He didn't fill space. He held it. He didn't ask for my past. He made room for my present, and though I didn't need him to feel whole, being with him made my peace feel witnessed. But still, beneath the peace, a quiet tension lingered, like a violin string tuned too tight. Because summer was approaching. And with it, my father's annual July 4th family reunion, the same gathering that changed everything the year before. I hadn't planned on attending. But then, one evening, James called. His voice was soft, a rare thing. "I wanted to give you a heads up," he said. "Dad's making a big toast this year. He asked me to let you know." I froze. He continued. "He's calling it a correction. His word, not mine." I laughed. Bitter, short. "A correction? Like an afterthought?" James was quiet. "I think he regrets what happened. He's not good with words, is he? But maybe this is his way." I didn't say anything. Then James added, "You don't have to come. But if you do, maybe don't do it for him." I hung up, heart pounding. That night, I sat on my balcony, sipping tea, watching lightning split the sky in the distance. The city smelled like rain and lavender. And I asked myself, was I ready to be in that room again? Not to be seen, not to be celebrated, but to stand fully in my own skin, even if no one clapped. Something in me whispered yes, but this time, I wouldn't wear the green dress. I wouldn't show up hoping for anything. I would show up whole. The invitation came the same way it always did. Thick cardstock, gold lettering, the Whitmore family crest embossed at the top like it meant something sacred. I laid it on the table and stared at it for a long time. Then I poured myself a glass of water and went back to painting. I didn't need to open it. I already knew. Same vineyard, same date, same players. But everything else had changed. A year had passed since the last reunion, the one that unraveled me. And in that year, I'd stitched myself back together with thread I chose. No more performing. No more pleasing. I had cut ties with illusions and called it peace. And yet, as July approached, I felt the pull, not for closure, not even for recognition. I felt the pull to return as a mirror, not to reflect my father's shame, but to show him, in silence, everything he refused to become. I wore soft linen, navy blue, no jewelry, no green dress, just quiet strength. Theo offered to drive me. I said no. I needed to do this alone. The vineyard was glowing when I arrived. Golden light spilling across the tables, soft jazz dancing through the air. Everyone was already seated, drinks in hand, easy laughter rippling across the lawn like nothing had ever cracked beneath the surface. I moved quietly through the crowd. Mom saw me first. Her hand flew to her chest. "You came," she said, eyes shining. I nodded. "Just for the evening." James gave me a small smile. Clara hugged me. "Dad?" He turned his head slightly when I approached. His face flickered, something between surprise and something else. Not quite regret. Not quite pride. Just a pause. As if I didn't fit the image he'd prepared in his mind. "Isabella," he said. I looked him in the eye. "Charles." That surprised him. He motioned to an empty seat. I declined with a simple shake of the head and found one at the far end of the table, where the light from the overhead bulbs couldn't quite reach. I didn't come for the spotlight. I came to watch. Dinner passed slowly. The usual speeches. James told a story that made everyone laugh. Mom dabbed at her eyes when Clara announced they were expecting. I clapped, genuinely. There was joy in that moment, and I didn't resent it. Then came the toast. Dad stood, glass in hand. The room fell still. "I want to begin," he said, "by acknowledging something I got wrong." Silence. He cleared his throat, searching for words like they were hidden between the vines. "Last year, I made a mistake. I let my pride, my expectations, speak louder than my love." A few heads turned toward me. He went on. "I failed to acknowledge someone who deserved to be honored. Someone who has worked quietly, deeply, and without fanfare. Someone who has shown resilience, intelligence, and integrity in ways I didn't always understand." My heartbeat slowed. Steady. Measured. I want to recognize my daughter, Isabella. Not just for what she's done, but for who she's become. He raised his glass. "To Isabella." Everyone turned. Some smiled, some clapped, some looked confused. I didn't move. I let the moment hang, stretched thin and trembling, like a tightrope between two lives. Then I stood, slowly, calmly. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't smile. I simply said, "You don't get to celebrate what you refuse to nurture." It was soft, but it sliced. A ripple passed through the table. James dropped his eyes. Mom froze, napkin clenched in her hand. Dad's hand, still raised, faltered slightly, then lowered. He said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. The silence wasn't awkward. It was holy. It was the sound of a legacy crumbling, quietly, under the weight of its own denial. I remained standing, my breath even, my gaze steady. He looked at me, not with anger, not with confusion, but with recognition. And maybe for the first time in his life, he saw the cost of his silence reflected back at him, in a woman he did not shape, could not control, and would never again diminish. The toast was over. He sat down. I walked to the edge of the lawn, the cicadas humming louder now, the sky turning soft violet. Miles wasn't with me, but I felt him, somehow, walking beside me in memory. As I reached the garden gate, James followed. He didn't say anything at first. Then he whispered, "I've never seen him look like that." I turned. Like what? Small. I nodded. He's not. He just thought he was big because we kept shrinking. James swallowed hard. Are you okay? I looked up at the stars beginning to emerge through the clouds, and I said, truthfully, I'm finally free. Then I walked away. No applause, no redemption arc. Just peace, the kind that doesn't need an audience. Some stories don't end with fireworks. Some end with a soft closing door, a quiet room, and the feeling that, finally, the weight has been set down. A week after the reunion, I woke up before the sun. No alarm, just a stillness inside me, like something that had been unsettled for years had finally found its resting place. Miles padded softly beside me as I moved through the apartment, barefoot on the warm wood floors. I brewed tea, opened the windows, and let the morning air wash through everything. The sky was blush and lavender, the kind of color that only shows up when you're finally paying attention. I didn't think about the confrontation much, not in a looping, obsessive way. It didn't need replaying. It had spoken for itself. And the strange thing was, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. After all the years of striving, all the effort to be seen, to be chosen, I had stopped chasing. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't begged. I hadn't demanded anything from him. I had just told the truth and left it there. That's all some truths ever need. I found myself doing the simplest things with more attention. I cooked without rushing. I took walks without checking the time. I called old friends and listened fully, without multitasking. It was like my nervous system had been rewritten, not into someone new, but into someone I had once been, long before I learned to shrink. One afternoon, while cleaning out the closet, I found a box of old letters, ones I had written to my father over the years but never sent. Some were angry, some were desperate. Some were just quiet pleas from a younger version of me who kept hoping that if she said it the right way, he'd finally understand. I read a few, folded them carefully, then walked to the backyard and burned them in the fire pit, one by one, not out of bitterness, but as a blessing. Each flame flickered up and disappeared like a thread snipped from an old tapestry I no longer needed to wrap myself in. Theo came by that evening. He didn't ask questions. He brought me lemon tart and kissed my forehead, and we sat on the steps in silence, watching the embers fade. I had told him what happened, in my own time. He listened the way someone does when they're not waiting to speak, just holding space, no advice, no solution, just presence. That's all I ever needed. In August, my workshop hit capacity. I started offering retreats, long weekends in the mountains with other women who were learning to rewrite their stories. We meditated, journaled, cried, and laughed over wine and roasted vegetables. They weren't dramatic transformations. They were quiet returns. To self, to breath, to belonging. One evening at the retreat, I asked the group to write letters to someone they once craved love from, but never truly received it. The kind of letter that doesn't ask for a response. I wrote mine to the version of me who sat at the reunion that night, waiting for her name. It said, "You didn't get the toast, but you gave yourself the life. And that's more than enough." I placed it in the river behind the cabin, watching it float gently downstream, soft paper melting into current. And that was the real goodbye. Not to him, to her. The girl who waited. The woman who tried so hard. The daughter who kept her voice small to stay safe. I wasn't her anymore. I didn't become someone else. I returned to who I was before the world told me I had to earn love. Mom called the following week. Her voice was soft. "He doesn't say much," she began, "but he's quieter, different." I let her speak. Then I told her, lovingly, clearly, that I wasn't angry. I just didn't have space anymore for relationships that only moved when I carried all the weight. She cried, not the brittle kind, the kind that cracks something old. We talked for an hour. Maybe there's healing there, too. Slow, honest, no longer built on pretending. James and Clara's baby was born in the fall. A girl. They named her Eliana. He sent me a photo, her tiny hand curled around Clara's thumb. "She already has your quiet stare," he wrote. I smiled, sent back a heart. I wasn't angry at James either. We were both raised in the same house, just handed different mirrors. And now, I was done holding mine up for anyone else to see themselves. I spent my birthday in a cabin by the lake. Just me, Theo, and Miles. No big celebration. No need for applause. Just warm socks, cinnamon coffee, and a man who never made me question if I was worthy of being chosen. He asked me once, weeks later, if you could say one last thing to your dad and know he'd really hear it, what would it be? I thought for a long time. Then I said, "I forgive you for not becoming the man I needed, but I don't need you anymore to be whole." He nodded. That was enough. Some nights, I still sit by the window, writing in my journal by candlelight. The stars over Denver always feel like little witnesses. I don't ask them for signs anymore. I just thank them for the light, because now I know the real transformation wasn't in what I said to him. It was in what I finally stopped saying to myself.